Far out in the desert, where the night air grows cool and the horizon disappears into darkness, the sand keeps its own kind of memory. By day, the desert can seem empty. It stretches beneath the sun in long waves of gold, ochre, and pale stone. Heat rises from the ground. Distant shapes tremble in the air. The world feels exposed, almost too bright to understand. But at night, the desert changes. The light softens, the dunes lose their sharp edges, and the sky opens above the land with a depth that daylight hides. Stars appear slowly, first a few, then many, until the darkness seems filled with quiet points of fire. A gentle wind moves across the sand, not strong enough to disturb the world, only enough to shift the surface and carry the desert a little farther through time. Somewhere beneath that sand, there may be the remains of a city. Not only stones, but the traces of human life. Walls that once held rooms, streets once crossed by travelers, courtyards where people worked, rested, traded, argued, and slept. What now seems empty may once have been filled with footsteps, voices, animals, smoke from cooking fires, and the ordinary sounds of a place that expected tomorrow to come. This is the story of a lost city beneath the sand. It is not the story of one city only, but of many places that have risen, flourished, faded, and slowly disappeared into desert silence. Some were real cities whose names are still known. Others survive only in fragments, a buried wall, a broken column, a line in an old text, a shard of pottery, or a rumor carried from one generation to another. The desert has hidden many human worlds. Oasis towns, caravan stations, temples, markets, wells, watchtowers, and homes once stood in places that now appear still and uninhabited. People lived there with routines as ordinary as ours. They woke before the heat became too strong. They drew water, baked bread, repaired tools, counted goods, cared for animals, and watched the sky for signs of weather, direction, and season. At night, the city cooled. The day's heat left the walls slowly. Oil lamps burned in small rooms. Animals settled near gates and courtyards. Merchants closed their stores or counted the last measures of grain, spice, cloth, salt, metal, or glass. Somewhere, a family shared a simple meal. Somewhere else, a traveler looked upward, reading the stars before the next stage of a long journey. The same sky that stretches over the desert now stretched over them then. Time passed, as it always does. Trade routes changed. Wells weakened or dried. Rivers shifted. Empires rose, reached outward, and then lost strength. Roads became unsafe. Markets moved elsewhere, and the reasons for staying became fewer with each generation. A city does not always vanish through disaster. More often, it becomes quieter gradually, until the place that once gathered people begins to release them. After the last inhabitants leave, the desert does not hurry. Wind moves through open rooms. Sand gathers beside walls. Roofs collapse under heat, dryness, and time. Wood disappears first. Fabric, rope, and baskets vanish more easily. Stone and fired clay remain longer, but even they can be covered. A street becomes a shallow line beneath the surface. A courtyard becomes a dip in the ground. A tower becomes only a shape suggested by the dune above it. Centuries later, someone crossing the desert may pass over the place without knowing. The surface may show nothing more than sand, low ridges, scattered stones, and the changing color of light before morning. Yet below, the city may still be present in fragments, sleeping under the weight of years. In this quiet documentary, we will follow the life of such a place. We will imagine the desert not as empty, but as a landscape of memory, We will travel along ancient roads, enter an oasis city, listen to the soft noise of markets near dusk, and walk through streets that once belonged to daily life. We will also watch the desert reclaim what people built, not suddenly or cruelly, but with patience. Grain by grain, season by season, the line between city and landscape begins to blur. Human order softens into ruin, and ruin slowly becomes part of the earth around it. Much later, archaeologists may uncover the traces: walls, pottery, inscriptions, bones, wells, floors, tools, and the quiet evidence of lives once lived beneath the same sky. Their work does not fully bring the city back, but it allows us to listen to what remains. For now, the desert is still. The moon rises over the dunes, the stars brighten above the unseen ruins, and beneath the sand, an old city waits in silence. To us, the desert often looks like a place between destinations, a wide space to cross, a silence to endure, a distance measured in heat, thirst, and horizon. But for much of history, deserts were not simply empty barriers. They were routes. They were passages between worlds. Across them moved traders, pilgrims, messengers, soldiers, animals, stories, languages, and goods that could change the life of a city far away. Long before modern roads, ports, engines, or maps, the desert had its own paths. Some were marked clearly by stone, wells, watchtowers, or settlements. Others existed mostly in memory: a line of dunes to follow, a mountain shape on the horizon, a seasonal water source, a place where the ground became firm enough for animals to walk. To someone unfamiliar with the land, the desert could appear endless and unreadable. To people who knew it, it was filled with signs. A trade route was not only a line across a map, it was a chain of knowledge: where to travel before sunrise, where to rest during the worst heat, where to find water, which wells were reliable, which valleys were dangerous, which stars could guide the direction of travel, and which settlements could offer shelter before the next empty stretch. The desert road depended on patience. A caravan could not move like a ship before the wind, or a rider on a green plain. Its progress was slow, measured by the endurance of animals, the weight of goods, and the distance between places where water could be found. The rhythm of travel was shaped by the climate itself. In the heat of the day, movement could become difficult or dangerous. Evening and early morning offered cooler hours. Night, especially under a bright moon, could make the road gentler. Imagine such a road under the stars. The ground is pale with moonlight. The dunes rise and fall like frozen waves. Somewhere in the distance, a low line of mountains gives shape to the horizon. The path itself may be no more than worn earth, scattered stones, and the memory of many feet and hooves passing through the same narrow corridor over generations. Along this route, a caravan moves slowly. The animals carry cloth, spices, salt, incense, grain, metalwork, glass, dyes, or books. The exact cargo depends on the time and place, but the meaning is the same. The desert is carrying one part of the world toward another. A market city beyond the dunes may be waiting for what the caravan brings. Another city, far behind, may depend on what will return. The people traveling with the caravan know that the desert must be respected. They listen to the wind, watch the animals, measure water carefully, and keep track of distance not only in miles, but in hours of safe travel. A mistake in a green landscape may be inconvenient. A mistake in the desert can become serious. This gave desert travel a careful intelligence, built from experience rather than speed. Guides were essential. They knew where a route bent around soft sand, where a dry riverbed could be followed, where a hidden well might lie, or how far one could travel before the next reliable stopping place. They understood that the desert changed. Wind could cover tracks, sand could shift. A landmark could look different in morning light than it did at dusk. Knowledge had to be alive, adjusted by weather, season, and memory. For the travelers, the road was not separate from the sky. The stars helped give direction. The moon gave light. Clouds, rare as they might be in some regions, could change the feeling of a journey. The rising of certain stars or constellations could belong to a season, and seasons mattered deeply. Some roads were safer at one time of year than another. Some wells were stronger after rain. Some stretches became almost impossible when heat was at its worst. The desert road was therefore both physical and celestial. It lay on the ground, but it was read through the heavens. This is one of the reasons ancient desert travel feels so connected to night. Under a wide sky, the human world becomes smaller, but also more aware of its place. A caravan moving beneath the stars is not only crossing land, it is moving inside a larger order of light, direction, temperature, and time. The cities that grew along these roads did not appear by accident. They often stood where movement needed to pause. A place with water could become more than a place of survival. It could become a station, then a market, then a settlement with walls, storage rooms, workshops, shrines, and homes. Travelers brought goods, but they also brought news. They brought languages, customs, rumors, religious ideas, techniques, and tastes from far away. A desert city could therefore be isolated and connected at the same time. It might be surrounded by emptiness, yet linked to distant regions by the road that passed through it. Its wealth could come not from fertile fields alone, but from being a necessary stop in a difficult landscape. The desert made travel hard, and because travel was hard, safe stopping places became valuable. In such a city, the road did not end at the gate. It entered the market, the storeroom, the stable, the well, the courtyard, and the conversation of the people who lived there. The road shaped the city's daily life. It decided when visitors arrived what goods appeared in the market, what news was heard, and which faces became familiar for a few days before moving on. By night, after a caravan reached shelter, the city changed its pace. Animals were unloaded and watered. Goods were counted or locked away. Fires were lit. Food was prepared. The day's dust settled on clothes, walls, and stone. The travelers, exhausted by heat and distance, might sleep deeply beneath a roof or in a protected courtyard, while the desert wind moved quietly beyond the walls. The road outside remained open. It had brought them there, and soon it would call them onward. The idea of the desert road is important because it changes how we imagine the lost city. A city beneath the sand was not always a lonely place. It may once have been part of a living network, connected by routes that crossed great distances. Its streets may have heard many accents. Its markets may have held objects from landscapes its own people had never seen. A small item found in the ruins, a bead, a coin, a piece of glass, a pattern on a pot, can sometimes reveal a connection to places far beyond the horizon. This is how archaeology often discovers movement. A city may be buried in one desert, yet its remains can contain evidence of another coast, another river valley, another empire, or another mountain region. Trade leaves traces. Materials travel, styles travel, beliefs travel. Even ordinary objects can become quiet witnesses to long journeys. For the people who lived in the city, this movement was part of normal life. They may not have thought of themselves as living in a remote historical mystery. To them, the city was simply home. They knew the sound of animals approaching the gate, the smell of packed goods, the timing of market days, the tired faces of travelers arriving after a difficult stage. They knew which roads brought profit, which roads brought danger, and which roads had become quieter than they once were. A desert city listened to traffic. Not traffic in the modern sense, but the rhythm of arrival and departure. A caravan's appearance could mean business, news, letters, warnings, marriages, debts, opportunities, or trouble. If the road was busy, the city breathed more easily. If the road weakened, the city felt it. The fate of such places was often tied to forces larger than themselves. A new route could redirect trade. A political border could make travel more dangerous. A war could close a road. A dried well could make a stretch of desert too risky. A river changing course could weaken agriculture nearby. A port rising in importance could draw merchants away. Sometimes a city declined, not because it failed in a single dramatic moment, but because the lines connecting it to the wider world slowly shifted. The desert road could create a city. It could also abandon one. This is why the landscape around a lost city can feel so haunting. The empty road, if it can still be traced, suggests both movement and absence. It leads toward gates that may no longer stand, through markets that no longer open, past houses whose roofs are gone, and into courtyards where only sand gathers now. But the road itself is a kind of memory. Even when stones are broken and walls have fallen, the direction remains. A path worn into the land can survive longer than the people who used it. It can be buried, uncovered, and buried again. It can appear as a faint line in the sand, a row of stones, a difference in soil, or a pattern seen more clearly from above than from the ground. To follow such a route in imagination is to move backward through time. The silence of the present begins to make room for the sound of the past, the slow steps of animals, the creak of loaded packs, the low voices of travelers, the wind against cloth, the small sounds of water being poured carefully from a skin or jar. These are not heroic sounds. They are practical and human. They belong to people trying to cross a difficult place with enough care to arrive. The road also reminds us that ancient life was not still. When we see ruins, we often imagine stillness because that is what remains. Stone does not move, broken walls do not speak, sand gathers quietly, but the city that once stood there may have been full of movement. Goods coming in, goods going out, children running across shaded spaces, workers repairing walls, animals waiting near wells, travelers asking about distance, weather, and safety. The lost city was once part of motion. That motion gave it reason to exist, and when the motion changed, the city's future changed with it. This is the gentle tragedy of many desert places. They were built with intelligence, effort, and hope. They adapted to difficult land. They turned scarcity into order by protecting water, storing goods, and creating shelter. For a time, they succeeded. Then the conditions that sustained them shifted, and the desert, which had always surrounded them, began to feel larger. At night, An abandoned road can still seem to lead somewhere. Moonlight gives shape to the stones. Stars restore a sense of direction. The dunes may cover parts of the route, but the eye searches for continuity. A person standing there might feel that the city is not entirely gone, only waiting beyond the next rise of sand. That feeling is part of the spell of lost cities. They make absence feel almost present. They suggest that the past is not behind us in a simple way, but beneath us, around us, hidden in the ground, waiting in fragments. A buried road, a broken gate, or a line of stones can become a quiet invitation to imagine the lives that once depended on them. As we move deeper into this story, the road will lead us toward the city itself, not yet as a ruin, but as it may once have been, a place of water, shelter, trade, and nightfall in the desert. A place where people looked out across the same sand and saw not emptiness, but connection. The desert was not only a wilderness, it was a road, and somewhere along that road, a city began to rise. In the desert, water is never only water. It is direction, shelter, memory, power, and survival. A place where water can be found becomes more than a point on the land. It becomes a pause in the journey, a reason to gather, and eventually a reason to build. This is how many desert cities began, not with walls or markets at first, but with water, a spring rising from underground, a well that reached deep enough to remain reliable, a depression where rain, rare as it might be, could collect for a time, a place where palms could grow, animals could drink, and travelers could rest before continuing across the dry distances beyond. An oasis is often imagined as a sudden patch of green in the sand, but in history it was also a system. It required knowledge, care, and protection. Water had to be found, drawn, stored, shared, and defended. Channels might be cut, cisterns might be built, wells might be lined with stone. Trees might be planted not only for fruit, but for shade and stability. A small settlement could grow around this center. At first, there may have been only a few shelters near the water, a place for travelers to sleep, a place for animals to be tied, a place where people could trade what they carried for what they needed. Over time, the pause became more permanent. Families remained. Storehouses were built. Paths became streets. The edge of the settlement became clearer, and the people living there began to organize their lives around the careful rhythm of the oasis. The desert outside remained vast, but the oasis created a different kind of time. Inside its limits, there was shade. There was work that could be repeated from one day to the next. There were trees to tend, walls to repair, jars to fill, animals to feed, and grain to measure. The settlement did not escape the desert. It learned to live with it. This is an important difference. A desert city was not a denial of the landscape. It was an agreement with it. The people who built such places understood that heat, distance, wind, dryness, and scarcity could not be ignored. Their architecture, routines, and habits were shaped by these facts. Thick walls could keep interiors cooler. Narrow streets could create shade. Courtyards could hold night air. Flat roofs could become places of work, rest, or sleep when the heat inside rooms became too heavy. The city rose slowly because every part of it had to answer the same question: how do people live here without wasting what cannot easily be replaced? Water shaped the answer. A well was not simply a hole in the ground. It could be the center of social life, the place where news passed, where animals gathered, where travelers asked about the road ahead, and where the value of the city became visible. Whoever controlled water controlled more than a resource. They controlled safety, hospitality, trade, and sometimes authority. Around the water, the city learned to grow. Date palms offered food and shade. Gardens, where they were possible, produced herbs, vegetables, or small crops. Animals provided transport, milk, wool, meat, or labor. Potters, metalworkers, weavers, builders, scribes, merchants, and religious figures could all become part of the city's life once the settlement became stable enough to support them. A caravan road could bring wealth, but the oasis made that wealth possible. Travelers needed a place to recover. Animals needed care. Goods needed storage. Merchants needed trustworthy measures, safe courtyards, and agreements that could survive beyond a single transaction. A city that provided these things became more than a stop. It became a node in a wider world. The first walls may have been modest. They may have marked boundaries more than they promised total defense. But as the settlement grew, walls could become necessary, not only against enemies, but against wind, animals, drifting sand, and the disorder of open space. Gates gave the city a shape. Streets gave it an inner order. Public buildings gave it memory and authority. By day, such a city would have been defined by heat and labor. People rose early, before the sun became too strong. Water was drawn, bread was prepared, goods were moved, animals were checked, and repairs were made in the cooler hours. As the sun climbed higher, work slowed or moved into shade. Stone, mud brick, and packed earth absorbed heat. The city became quieter at midday, not because nothing was happening, but because survival required a different pace. Toward evening, life returned to the open spaces. Shadows lengthened across walls and courtyards. The air softened. People came outside again. Travelers entered through the gate if they had timed their journey well. Lamps were prepared. Food was cooked. The oasis water reflected the first stars, and the day's harsh brightness gave way to a cooler, more human world. At night, the city became beautiful in a different way. Moonlight touched the upper walls while lamps warmed the lower streets. Palm leaves moved slightly in the desert air. The well, pool, or channel at the center of the settlement held reflections of flame and sky. The city did not need to be large to feel important. In the desert, even a modest cluster of homes, water, shade, and safety could feel like a miracle. For the people who lived there, it was not a miracle. It was work, generations of work. The lost city beneath the sand may have begun in this way, with a reliable source of water, a route that brought travelers, and the slow decision of people to remain. From that decision came walls, homes, markets, beliefs, habits, and a future that once seemed solid. Long before the city became ruins, it was a place of arrival, a place where the desert road found rest. As the oasis city grew, it became more than a practical shelter. It became a world with its own rhythm. People who were born there did not experience it as a temporary station between deserts. They knew the shape of its streets, the sound of its gates, the location of shaded corners at different hours of the day. They knew which families owned which courtyards, which merchants dealt in certain goods, and which wells or channels were most important during dry times. A city becomes real through such details, not through size alone, but through repetition. A door opened every morning. Bread was baked in the same place. A child carried water along the same path. A trader returned each season and stayed in the same courtyard. A wall was repaired by a father, then by a son. Over time, the settlement gathered habits, and those habits became identity. The oasis gave the city life, but it also created responsibility. Water had to be protected from waste and contamination. Storage jars, cisterns, and channels required maintenance. The trees needed care. Animals had to be managed so they did not damage the fragile green spaces. In a wet landscape, people might take abundance for granted. In a desert city, survival depended on attention. This attention shaped social order, rules about access to water, movement through gates, storage of goods, taxes, trade, and protection may have developed gradually. Some rules were practical, others carried religious or symbolic meaning. A shrine near water, a temple above the market, or a sacred place at the edge of the settlement could remind people that the city's life depended on forces larger than individual desire. Religious life in such places was often tied to landscape. People looked to the sky, to seasonal change, to springs, to storms, to fertility, to protection from danger. The desert could inspire fear, gratitude, discipline, and wonder. A city that survived there might feel chosen or blessed, not because life was easy, but because life was possible. Architecture gave this feeling a visible form. A temple, tower, gate, or public courtyard could rise above the everyday roofs, showing that the city was more than a collection of homes. It had a center. It had a story about itself. Its builders may have used local stone, mud brick, palm wood, plaster, reed, or imported materials brought by trade. Every building carried both practical and symbolic meaning: shade, storage, protection, ceremony, status, and belonging. The city's nightlife would have been quieter than its day, but not empty. A few lamps might burn near doorways or public spaces. Guards could watch the gates. Animals shifted in courtyards. The last conversations of the evening moved through open windows and shaded passages. A traveler might lie awake, listening to unfamiliar sounds and feeling grateful for walls between himself and the open desert. For residents, these sounds were ordinary. The creak of a door, the movement of water in a channel, a camel settling after a long journey, a pot placed carefully on stone, a voice lowered so others could sleep. These small noises belonged to the city's identity as much as its walls did. They were the sound of settlement, of people making life continue in a place where care was necessary. The Oasis city also changed the land around it. Paths grew more defined as people moved between fields, wells, gates, and roads. Waste areas formed outside the walls. Burial ground may have appeared on the edge of settlement. Workshops left traces of ash, slag, broken pottery, or worn floors. The city extended beyond its visible buildings through the marks of repeated human use. To an archaeologist, these marks matter. They show that a city was not only where people lived, but where they worked, stored, cooked, repaired, buried, traded, and adapted. A broken jar near a well can speak of daily water use. A worn threshold can speak of years of footsteps. A hearth can hold traces of what people ate. A wall rebuilt several times can reveal persistence, damage, and repair. In a sleep documentary, it is easy to imagine the Oasis city only as a beautiful night scene. Palms under the moon, lamps glowing beside water, quiet walls, and a cool wind after sunset. That image is true in feeling, but beneath it is a long history of management, labor, and adjustment. Beauty in the desert was not separate from discipline. The city survived because people knew how to measure, store, share, and wait. They understood that the generous hour of evening came after the hard brightness of day. They knew that shade had value, that a sealed jar mattered, that a repaired wall could protect against more than an enemy. It could protect against heat, sand, and the slow pressure of neglect. This is why the rise of an oasis city is such a powerful story. It shows human beings not conquering the desert, but negotiating with it. They took what the landscape offered and built carefully around it. They created a place where travelers could pause, where goods could be exchanged, where children could grow up knowing streets instead of endless horizon. For a time, the city succeeded. Its wells held, its gates opened, its lamps burned at night, its palms cast shade over water. People arrived from the road and found shelter there. Some continued onward. Others stayed, married, worked, aged, and became part of the city's memory. But every oasis city lived with uncertainty. A source of water could weaken, trade could move, sand could gather, political protection could fail. The same landscape that made the city valuable also made it vulnerable. To rise in the desert was to depend on balances that could shift over decades or centuries. Still, before decline, there was life. Before the dunes covered the walls, there were hands that built them. Before silence, there were evenings when the city rested under the stars, complete in itself, surrounded by darkness, but held together by water, labor, and trust. As we leave this chapter, imagine the oasis city at night. The day's heat has lifted from the stones. The water at the center reflects a few lamps and a pale moon. The palms move softly in the wind. Beyond the walls, the desert road waits in darkness. Inside, people sleep with the knowledge that morning will bring work again. For now, the city is alive, quietly, carefully, and beautifully alive. A desert city was most alive where the road entered the market. The gate, the main street, the well, the storage yards, and the covered stalls formed a world shaped by arrival. A caravan that reached the city near evening did not bring only goods. It brought movement from beyond the horizon. It brought news from distant towns, rumors from other roads, the fatigue of travel, and the quiet relief of having crossed another difficult stretch of land. By the time such a caravan approached the walls, the day's heat would often be weakening. The stones of the city still held warmth from the sun, but shadows had lengthened across the streets. People near the gate could recognize the signs of arrival before the travelers were close. Animals moving slowly, dust hanging low behind them, figures walking beside loaded packs, and the steady rhythm of a group that had learned to conserve its strength. The market responded gradually. Someone would call for space near a courtyard or storage area. Animals would be led toward water. Loads would be lowered with care because a damaged jar, torn bundle, or broken container could mean real loss. A merchant might check seals, knots, weights, or written marks. Another might speak with someone from the city about lodging, taxes, payment, protection, or the condition of the road ahead. None of this needed to be dramatic. It was work, And because it was repeated through seasons and years, it became part of the city's ordinary rhythm. The same spaces received travelers again and again. The same courtyards held animals. The same shaded walls protected goods from sun and theft. The market was not only a place of buying and selling, it was the city's point of contact with the wider world. During the day, the market may have been full of color and sound. Cloth hanging from wooden poles, baskets of grain, jars of oil, blocks of salt, bundles of herbs, small metal tools, lamps, leather, rope, dried fruit, carved objects, beads and pottery could all pass through such a place, depending on region and period. Some goods were local and practical. Others had crossed long distances and carried the value of rarity. But in a sleep documentary, the most peaceful moment is not the height of trade. It is the hour when trade begins to slow. As evening settles, the market changes character. The light turns amber. Dust becomes visible in the low sun, then disappears into blue shadow. A stall owner folds cloth over goods that will not be sold until morning. A potter gathers unsold vessels close to the wall. A scribe or merchant makes a final mark in a record. Someone sweeps sand away from a threshold, knowing that the wind will bring more before long. The city does not stop all at once. It softens. Voices lower as heat leaves the stones. The animals, watered and unloaded, become quieter. Lamps are lit in doorways and along covered passages. The smell of cooked food begins to replace the smell of dust, sweat, leather, and packed goods. The market that had been a place of negotiation becomes a place of rest. For a traveler, this transition could feel deeply comforting. Outside the walls lay open desert, with its distances, silence, and uncertainty. Inside the city, there was enclosure. There were sounds made by people who expected to wake in the same place tomorrow. There was water, food, shade, and the protection of walls. Even if the traveler was a stranger, the city offered a temporary order. A market at night was not empty in the way ruins are empty. It held the warmth of recent life. A cart left beside a wall suggested morning work. A covered stall suggested goods waiting to be opened again. Clay jars beside a doorway suggested water stored for the next day. The resting animals were part of the scene, their silhouettes large and calm in the lantern light. The city had paused, but it had not yet become silent. Markets in desert cities were often connected to inns, caravanserais, or protected courtyards where travelers could stay. These places were practical inventions, but they also shaped the social life of the road. A caravanserai might offer space for animals, rooms or platforms for people, storage for goods, and a secure enclosure where strangers could rest with some confidence. In such places, news traveled almost as importantly as merchandise. A merchant could learn whether a road had become unsafe, whether a well had weakened, whether a ruler had changed, whether taxes had increased, or whether demand for a certain good was rising in another city. Information had value because survival and profit both depended on timing. The desert road made knowledge precious. A person who knew which route was open, which market was hungry for grain, which border was dangerous, or which season favored travel, could make better choices than someone who carried goods blindly into the unknown. The market was therefore also a place of listening. At night, these conversations became slower. Men and women who had worked through the day might sit near lamps, speaking in low voices. Travelers who had crossed the desert might describe wind, heat, stars, water, and distance. Residents might ask about relatives elsewhere, prices in other towns, or events beyond the desert. The city, though fixed in place, extended itself through these conversations. This is how a lost city could belong to a larger world. Its walls may have stood in the desert, but its imagination reached along the roads that entered it. Through the market, the city heard about places it might never see. Through trade, it touched coastlines, mountains, river valleys, temples, ports, and courts far away. By the time the moon rose higher, the market would become quieter still. The brightest activity moved into private rooms, courtyards, or travelers' quarters. The open street settled into darkness, broken by small lamps. Stone arches held the day's last warmth. Sand gathered in corners. The wind moved gently through hanging cloth, making the market seem to breathe in its sleep. This was the city between motion and rest. The caravan had arrived. The goods had been counted. The road was, for one night, behind the walls. Nightfall in the market also revealed the hidden structure of the city. During the day, attention might be drawn to goods, bargaining, movement, and noise. At night, with activity reduced, the architecture became more noticeable. Covered passages, thick walls, storage rooms, inner courts, raised thresholds, shaded corners, and narrow streets all showed how carefully the city had been shaped for desert life. A market was not merely an open space where people happened to trade. It was designed, even if gradually, around protection and control. Goods needed shade, people needed passage, animals needed space to stand, turn, drink, and rest. Valuable materials needed secure storage. Visitors needed to be welcomed, watched, taxed, guided, or contained, depending on the city's customs and politics. The market therefore carried the practical intelligence of the place. Its walls moderated heat, its gates regulated arrival, its courtyards absorbed the pressure of caravans, its stalls turned scarcity and distance into exchange. Even the small details mattered. Where water could be reached, where animals could be tied, where lamps could be placed safely, and where goods could be kept dry, cool, or hidden. In the quiet hours, the remains of such design become easier to imagine. A line of stone rings along a wall might suggest where animals were once tied. A row of small rooms might have held merchants, guards, or stored goods. A broad paved area near the gate might have received loads before they were sorted. A raised platform may have served as a place for counting, judging, or display. Archaeology often works through such careful reading. A ruin rarely explains itself fully. It leaves patterns, and those patterns must be interpreted. A market street may be recognized not because a sign announces it, but because of repeated evidence, worn paving, concentrations of pottery, storage jars, scales, coins, imported materials, animal remains, hearths, or workshops nearby. The city speaks through distribution, wear, and context. This makes the market one of the most human parts of a lost city. Temples and palaces can tell us about power, ceremony, and belief. Walls can tell us about defense and boundaries, but markets often reveal daily dependence. They show what people needed, what they valued, what they repaired, what they imported, and what they threw away. A broken jar may seem humble, but it can be more intimate than a monument. It may have carried oil, grain, water, dates, wine, perfume, or something else entirely. It may have been used by a family, a traveler, a shopkeeper, or a temple servant. Once broken, it might have been discarded near a wall, reused as a scoop, placed in a foundation, or left where sand eventually covered it. In this way, the market keeps the memory of ordinary decisions, not only grand history, but the daily management of life. For the people in the city, night did not erase the market's importance. It only changed how the space was used. Some goods remained guarded, some animals rested nearby. A few late conversations continued in sheltered corners. Someone might walk through the street with a small lamp, checking doors, locks, or sleeping animals. Another person might rise before dawn to prepare bread or open a stall before the heat returned. The city's economy slept lightly. It had to. Morning would bring new needs, new negotiations, and perhaps another group of travelers at the gate. In a desert city, opportunity could not always be scheduled. If a caravan arrived, the city responded. If news came, it spread. If danger was reported, plans changed. Night provided rest, but not disconnection. Beyond the walls, the road continued under the stars. Another caravan might still be moving toward the city, using the cool hours to make progress. Somewhere outside, animals stepped through sand and stone. Their guides watched the sky and looked for the dark shape of the city against the horizon. The market, quiet now, would soon receive them. This is part of the beauty of imagining the lost city before it was lost. The ruins we see in the mind are still connected to human expectation. The empty street is not yet empty. The covered stalls are not yet broken. The lamps still have oil. The gates still open. People still believe that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough to prepare for it. That belief is at the center of every city. A city is built from the expectation of continuation. Walls are raised because people intend to remain. Wells are lined because water will be needed again. Markets are organized because exchange will return. Roads are maintained because travelers will come. Even small repairs carry hope because they assume a future in which the repair matters. The lost city beneath the sand once contained that hope. No one living there imagined the place only as a future ruin. They knew it as a living settlement, difficult, imperfect, necessary, and familiar. The market at night would not have felt like history. It would have felt like the end of an ordinary day. That thought makes the scene more peaceful and more moving. Lantern light on stone, closed stalls, animals breathing in the cool air, goods covered for the night, a road beyond the gate waiting for morning. Here, a small amount of repetition is useful, not as a list, but as atmosphere. The same actions repeated night after night, season after season, until they became the city's rhythm. Closing, resting, guarding, listening, preparing. These were the quiet habits that held the place together. Over centuries, such habits can seem fragile. A trade route shifts, and fewer caravans arrive. A well weakens, and water becomes harder to manage. A political change alters the safety of travel. A new city offers better protection or lower taxes. The market that once filled with voices becomes less crowded. Courtyards built for many animals hold only a few. Some stalls close and do not reopen, but that belongs to a later part of the story. For now, the market is still alive under the moon. The city has taken in the day's travelers. The road has entered through the gate and come to rest among walls, lamps, animals, goods, and sleeping people. Above the roofs, the stars remain bright. The desert beyond the walls is quiet, but not empty. It is waiting, as deserts do, with patience. And in the heart of the city, The market sleeps before another day of trade. A city is not only known by its walls, markets, and gates. It is also known by the places where people return at the end of the day. Behind the public streets of an oasis city, there would have been smaller spaces shaped by habit and privacy. Homes, courtyards, storage rooms, kitchens, sleeping areas, shaded corners, rooftops, and narrow passages between buildings. These were not always grand places. Many may have been simple, practical, and built from the materials the landscape allowed. Yet they formed the deepest part of the city's life. The market connected the city to the road, but the home connected people to continuity. A house in a desert city had to answer the climate before it answered beauty. Thick walls could protect the interior from heat. Small windows could reduce the force of the sun. Courtyards allowed air, light, and work to enter without exposing the household fully to the street. Roofs could become useful places in the evening when the temperature softened and the sky opened overhead. In such a house, daily life would have followed the rhythm of heat, shade, and water. Morning began early. Work that required movement was done before the day became heavy. Food might be prepared, animals checked, floors swept, water drawn, tools gathered, cloth repaired, grain ground, and storage jars opened or sealed. The house was not only a place of rest, it was a working structure organized around survival, family, and the repeated tasks that made tomorrow possible. By midday, the city's inner rooms may have become places of protection. Outside, the sun struck stone, plaster, and earth. Streets grew bright and quiet. The sound of activity did not vanish, but it changed. People moved more carefully. Shade became part of the architecture of time. A doorway, an overhang, a wall facing away from the sun, or a room cooled by thick masonry could determine where the household spent certain hours. In the evening, the house opened again. The courtyard became more comfortable. A roof might catch the first movement of cooler air. Lamps were lit after sunset. The smell of food drifted between walls. Children who had been kept from the harshest heat could move more freely. Conversations continued in lower voices as darkness entered the city. These ordinary details matter because they remind us that a lost city was not built for archaeology. It was built for living. The people who slept inside its walls did not think of their homes as future ruins. They thought about repairs, meals, family disagreements, stored grain, tired animals, broken tools, water jars, illness, marriage, debt, weather, and the next market day. They lived in time close to their own hands. A doorway mattered because someone used it every day. A threshold wore down because feet crossed it for years. A wall was patched because the room behind it was needed. When archaeologists uncover domestic spaces, the discoveries may seem humble compared with temples or monuments, but they are often more intimate. A cooking area, a floor, a storage jar sunk into the ground, a small bead, a spindle whorl, a child's object, a lamp, or a grinding stone can bring the past closer than a royal inscription. Such things speak of repetition, care, and ordinary dependence. A city survives through these small continuities. It is easy to imagine ancient life through rulers, wars, monuments, and trade, because those leave obvious marks in written history. But most of the city's time belonged to daily tasks. The lost city beneath the sand may have held dramatic events, but it was also shaped by thousands of quiet mornings and evenings. The temples and shrines of the city belonged to another layer of life. They rose from the same streets, but they pointed beyond everyday routine. A temple might have stood near the center, beside a market, close to water, or on a higher point of ground. It may have been modest or impressive, depending on the city's wealth and traditions. Its purpose was not only religious in a narrow sense, it also gave the community a shared focus, a place where order, memory, authority, and hope could be gathered. In a desert city, sacred spaces often carried the feeling of dependence. People knew that life relied on things they could not fully control: water, weather, fertility, health, safety on the road, the return of caravans, the behavior of rulers, the timing of seasons, and the endurance of wells. Rituals, offerings, prayers, festivals, or processions may have expressed this awareness. They gave shape to uncertainty. The temple also marked time. Certain days may have been set apart. Certain phases of the year may have brought ceremonies. The arrival of a caravan could be accompanied by offerings of thanks. The beginning or ending of a season might be noticed with ritual. In this way, the city did not live only by practical schedules. It lived by symbolic ones as well. At night, a temple could transform the mood of the streets around it. Its walls might catch moonlight differently from ordinary houses. Columns or doorways could cast long shadows. A lamp left burning near an entrance could make the stone seem warmer than the air around it. If the rest of the city had quieted, the temple might still hold a sense of presence, as if the day's noise had withdrawn and left behind a deeper kind of stillness. This stillness is useful for the imagination. We can picture a narrow street after nightfall, its stones cool under the moon. On one side, houses stand close together, their doors closed, their courtyards hidden. Farther ahead, the outline of a shrine or temple rises above the lower roofs. The market is no longer active, the gate has become quiet, and the desert outside the walls has turned blue-black beneath the stars. The city is not abandoned, it is resting. That difference matters. A sleeping city and a ruined city can look similar from a distance, but they belong to different kinds of silence. One silence expects morning. The other has lost that expectation. In this chapter, we are still within the living city, before the dunes have covered it, before the roofs have fallen, before the streets have become lines beneath the sand. For now, behind the walls, people sleep. Their homes hold warmth from the day. Their jars hold water for morning. Their tools are where they left them. Their lamps have burned low. Their city, though surrounded by desert, is still an organized human world. And above it, the same stars watch quietly. The quiet streets of an ancient city can tell us as much as its public monuments. A street is a practical thing. It allows movement from one place to another. Yet over time, it becomes more than a route. It becomes familiar ground. People remember where it narrows, where it turns, where shade falls in the afternoon, where water collects after rare rain, and which doorway belongs to which household. In a desert city, streets were often shaped by the need for shade and protection. They might be narrow enough for buildings to shelter each other from the sun. Their surfaces could be packed earth, stone paving, or a mixture of materials repaired many times. Sand would enter constantly, collecting near corners and thresholds. People swept it away, knowing it would return. This was not a failure of the city. It was simply the ongoing conversation between settlement and desert. At night, the street changed. The strong contrasts of day softened. The roughness of stone became less visible. Doorways became dark shapes. Lamps created small islands of amber light, while the moon gave a cooler outline to roofs, walls, and distant towers. The city's plan could still be read, but more slowly. One had to move by memory, by habit, and by the faint guidance of light. For residents, this was normal. A person returning home after speaking with a neighbor or finishing work near the market did not need to study the city. The body knew the turns. The feet knew the slope of the ground. A familiar street at night can be crossed almost without thought because it has been crossed so many times before. This is one of the deepest meanings of home, not only a building, but a place the body understands. A city becomes part of the people who live there through repeated movement. The route to the well, the path to the market, the corner where children gather, the wall where elders sit in evening shade, the step that must be avoided because it is uneven. These details form a private map. They may never be written down, but they are carried in memory. When such a city becomes a ruin, this invisible map is one of the first things to disappear. The stones remain longer than the habits that gave them meaning. A doorway can be uncovered, but not the exact sound of the person who opened it. A street can be traced, but not every errand it carried. Archaeology can recover structure, material, and pattern, but the lived familiarity of a place is harder to bring back. Still, the physical traces are powerful. A worn threshold shows repeated crossing. A repaired wall shows continued use. A blocked doorway may suggest a change in household arrangement. A layer of ash can indicate destruction, cooking, craft, or later reuse, depending on context. A street widened or narrowed over time reveals that the city was not frozen. It adapted. The lost city was not a single moment. It was many moments built on top of one another. Homes changed, families grew or vanished. Sacred spaces were rebuilt. Markets shifted, streets were repaired. New walls cut across old ones. A city is always becoming itself, even when it seems ancient and permanent to those who live there. This makes the later burial under sand more moving. The desert did not cover a still object. It covered a place that had once changed constantly through human care. Behind every buried wall there may have been decisions: where to sleep, where to store grain, whether to repair a roof, how to divide a room, when to light a lamp, which shrine to visit, which neighbor to trust. Ancient temples, too, carried layers of change. A sacred building could be expanded, repaired, decorated, neglected, reused, or replaced. Its meaning might shift as rulers changed or as new beliefs arrived along trade routes. A city connected to roads was rarely sealed from influence. Ideas traveled with goods, and religious life could absorb distant symbols, stories, or practices. In the quiet streets near a temple, one might have sensed this mixture of local and distant worlds. A god or sacred figure could be tied to the oasis, the spring, the road, the sky, or protection in the desert. Offerings might include local produce, imported incense, oil, small objects, or written prayers. The temple connected the practical city to a larger sense of order. It offered people a way to ask for continuity in a place where continuity was never guaranteed. As night deepened, the temple and the homes around it settled into the same darkness. Public and private life became less distinct. The city's important buildings, ordinary houses, and humble storage rooms all stood under the same moonlight. The hierarchy of day softened. What remained was shape, silence, and the feeling of a human settlement held inside a vast landscape. This is the part of the lost city that can feel most peaceful. Not the market's movement, not the caravan's arrival, not the difficult road, but the interior of the city after the day has ended. A place where the road has become memory for the night, where water has been stored, where the lamps are low, where the desert wind moves above roofs and along closed doors. The quiet streets remind us that history is not only made by events, it is made by dwelling, by remaining in a place long enough to know its sounds, by repairing what breaks, by teaching children where to find water, by trusting that the same street will be there tomorrow. This trust is ordinary when life is stable, but from a distance it becomes tender. We know what the people in the city could not know, that one day the streets would empty, the doors would fall, and the sand would begin to enter without being swept away. But that time has not come yet. For now the city is still awake in its own quiet way. It rests under the stars, surrounded by desert, shaped by water, trade, labor, and belief. Its homes hold the warmth of human life. Its temple keeps watch over the sleeping streets. Its walls stand against the night, and for a little while longer, the lost city is not lost at all. A city does not always fall in a single night. Sometimes there is no fire on the horizon, no army at the gate, no sudden disaster that people remember for generations. Some cities are changed more quietly. They become less necessary. The road bends elsewhere. The well weakens. A market loses its importance. A family leaves, then another, and then another after that. From the outside, the city may still look whole for a long time. The walls remain. The gate still stands. The temple casts its shadow over the street. The market stalls are still recognizable, and the houses still hold the shape of rooms. But inside, the pattern of life has begun to loosen. Fewer lamps are lit at night. Fewer animals wait near the courtyards. Fewer voices pass through the market after sunset. The desert does not need to conquer such a place. It only needs to wait. For years, perhaps for centuries, the people of the city had pushed back against sand, heat, wind, and dryness. They swept thresholds. They repaired roofs. They cleared channels. They strengthened walls where cracks appeared. They kept doors working, wells protected, and courtyards usable. Settlement in the desert was never passive. It required constant attention. When that attention weakens, the landscape begins to return. At first, the changes are small. Sand collects in the corner of a courtyard and is not removed. A roof beam cracks and is not replaced. A doorway loses its wooden frame. A room that once stored grain becomes empty. A section of wall damaged by heat and time waits longer for repair than it once would have. Nothing about this looks like an ending while it is happening. It looks like delay. It looks like tiredness. It looks like a city doing a little less than it did before. But delay can become habit, and habit can become decline. A neighborhood where several houses are empty changes the feeling of the street. A market with fewer traders changes the confidence of the people who remain. A temple that receives fewer offerings may still stand, but it no longer holds the same place in the city's life. The physical city remains visible, while the human city begins to thin. The desert notices every opening. Wind moves through a broken door. Sand enters a room where no one sleeps. Dust gathers on a floor where no feet pass. A courtyard without regular use becomes less like a private space and more like part of the open land. The boundary between inside and outside begins to blur. This is one of the slowest forms of disappearance. The city is not erased at once. It is translated little by little back into landscape. Walls become windbreaks, streets become channels for drifting sand. Roofless rooms collect moonlight, dust, and silence. Places built for human purpose begin to serve the movement of weather instead. Mud brick, so useful in dry climates, can last a long time if protected, but it is still vulnerable. Once roofs fail and walls are exposed, edges soften, plaster flakes away, corners round. Rain, even rare rain, can do damage when maintenance has stopped. Stone lasts longer, but stone buildings also depend on joints, foundations, and the balance of weight. When parts collapse, others become unstable. Wood disappears more quickly. Doors, beams, shelves, shutters, ladders, and furniture may be taken away, reused, burned, or simply decay. Fabric, baskets, rope, mats, and leather rarely survive unless conditions are unusually kind. What remains most often is the harder memory of the city: stone, pottery, packed floors, foundations, and the stubborn outline of walls. This is why ruins can feel both present and incomplete. They show structure, but not softness. They preserve rooms, but not the life that made those rooms warm. The desert takes especially well what is light. It removes roofs, voices, smoke, cloth, shade, and movement first. The heavier things remain longer, standing beneath the sky until even they are covered, broken, or absorbed into the ground. At night, during the early years of abandonment, the city may have looked strangely peaceful. The moon would still rise over the same roofs and walls. Stars would still appear above the streets. The stones would cool after sunset. But the difference would be felt in the absence of response. No one came to relight a lamp. No one swept the sand from the door. No one checked the animals, closed the storehouse, repaired the broken stair, or lowered a voice so children could sleep. Silence changed from rest into emptiness. A sleeping city expects morning. An abandoned city does not. Yet even abandonment is rarely complete at once. Some people may have remained long after others left. A few families might continue to use part of the settlement. A shrine might still be visited. Travelers might shelter in empty buildings. Shepherds, nomads, or passing caravans might reuse rooms, wells, courtyards, and walls for practical reasons. A city can have a long afterlife before it becomes a ruin. This afterlife is important. It means that the boundary between living place and archaeological site is not always clear. A house may become a shelter. A temple may become storage. A market street may become a path for animals. A wall built for defense may later serve only as shade against wind. The city's original purpose fades, but its materials continue to be useful. The desert, too, makes use of what remains. A standing wall changes the path of wind and causes sand to gather. A broken column creates a small shadow where seeds might briefly settle after rain. A collapsed roof becomes a mound that changes how water runs during a storm. The ruins become part of the physical behavior of the land. In this way, the city does not vanish from the desert. It becomes part of it. The same stones that once separated human order from wilderness now help shape dunes, shadows, and drainage. The same streets that once guided people may guide wind. The same courtyards that once held families may hold sand, lizards, shrubs, and moonlight. Time does not hurry through such a place. One season adds a little sand, another removes some of it. A wall stands for decades, then falls in a storm. A pot remains buried and whole while a larger structure collapses above it. The visible city and the hidden city change places again and again, depending on wind, erosion, and the movement of dunes. The desert is often imagined as empty, but here it becomes almost archival. It covers, protects, damages, reveals, and hides. Not with intention, but with patience. The slow burial of a city changes how we think about time. Human time is often measured in days, seasons, and lifetimes. We remember arrivals, departures, repairs, births, deaths, and decisions. But the desert works with another scale. It measures by wind direction, dry years, rare rain, shifting routes, and the long settling of sand against stone. A person may leave a house and expect to return. A family may close a room and believe it will be opened again. A merchant may store goods in a courtyard, thinking only of the next season. But history does not always announce when ordinary actions become final ones. The last meal cooked in a house may not feel like the last meal. The last lamp lit near a doorway may not be recognized as the last light. The final sweeping of a threshold may be done without ceremony, by someone simply keeping the house in order. This is one of the quietest thoughts in archaeology. The final moments of a place are often ordinary. The desert does not need a dramatic farewell. It enters after people stop resisting it. A few grains at first, then a shallow drift, then a layer that changes the shape of the room. When enough years pass, the floor is no longer a floor in any human sense. It becomes a buried surface, waiting for a future hand to find it. Some parts of the city would disappear quickly from memory. A family name might be forgotten within generations. The purpose of a small room might become unclear. A local story might change until it no longer matches the place that inspired it. Written records, if they existed, might be lost, broken, reused, or never written at all. Many lives leave no inscription, other parts persist. A tower visible from a distance may remain a landmark after the city is empty. A well may continue to be known. A ruined gate may give the site a name among travelers. In some cases, the memory of a place survives as legend, a city swallowed by sand, a market that once shone with wealth, a road that no one uses anymore, a hidden well, a buried temple, a warning about pride or misfortune. Such stories may not be accurate in every detail, but they show that ruins continue to work on the human imagination. A buried city becomes a question. Who lived there? Why did they leave? What remains beneath the dunes? The desert protects mystery by making evidence difficult to see. A person standing above buried walls may notice only small changes in the ground. A ridge, a scattering of pottery, stones that seem too regular to be natural, or the strange way sand rises over something solid underneath. Without careful attention, the city can remain hidden in plain sight. This hiddenness gives desert ruins their particular power. Forests cover ruins with growth. Seas cover them with water. Modern cities cover them with new buildings. The desert covers them with apparent simplicity. Sand can make a complicated human place look like a smooth landscape again. But beneath that smoothness, the city may still have shape. Rooms may remain connected. Streets may still run between walls. A well may be filled, but present. Pottery may lie where it fell. A floor may preserve ash from an old hearth. A threshold may still show the wear of feet that crossed it long before anyone imagined the place would be lost. The desert is patient, but it is not perfect. It hides and preserves unevenly. Some objects survive because they are buried quickly in dry conditions. Others are destroyed by exposure, reuse, erosion, animals, later visitors, or looting. Archaeology must work with what remains, not with what we wish had survived. The past arrives incomplete, and that incompleteness is part of its truth. Still, even fragments can be generous. A shard of pottery can reveal clay, technique, trade, storage, taste, and use. A wall can reveal planning. A street can reveal movement. A layer of sand inside a room can show that abandonment happened gradually. A collapsed roof can show the moment when maintenance ended. A repaired structure can show that people tried to keep the place alive before they finally let it go. In this way, decline is not only loss, it is evidence of effort. The city may have struggled for a long time. People may have adapted, reduced, reused, repaired, and reorganized. They may have moved from one quarter to another, abandoned outer areas while keeping the center alive, or maintained the well and temple after the market weakened. Human communities rarely surrender easily. They adjust until adjustment is no longer enough. When the last residents leave, the desert does not celebrate. It simply continues. The wind moves through the gate because the gate is open. Sand gathers in rooms because no one removes it. Moonlight falls on broken walls because roofs are gone. The stars return each night, not as witnesses in a human sense, but as part of the same sky that was always there. This can feel sad, but it can also feel peaceful. The city returns to silence without being meaningless. Its life has already happened. Its walls have sheltered people. Its market has received travelers. Its well has drawn water from darkness. Its temple has held prayers. Its streets have carried footsteps, errands, animals, voices, and sleep. Nothing can make those lives continue forever, but the traces remain. The desert takes its time, and by taking its time, it allows the past to settle rather than vanish completely. It covers the city slowly enough for fragments to survive. It hides the place, but it also keeps parts of it safe from faster destruction. Centuries later, when the wind shifts or a shovel enters the ground, the city may begin to return in pieces. A wall line appears, a jar emerges, a floor is cleared, a doorway is recognized. These discoveries belong to the next part of the story. For now, the city is still beneath the sand, held in a long pause between disappearance and rediscovery. Above it, the desert night remains calm. The moon moves over dunes that were once streets. Wind passes across roofs that are now mounds. The city no longer resists the desert, yet it has not entirely been erased. It is hidden, it is changed, and it is waiting. When a buried city begins to return, it does not return as a city. It returns as evidence. A line of stones appears beneath the sand. A wall is traced from one corner to another. A floor is cleared carefully, inch by inch. Pottery fragments emerge from the ground, sometimes plain, sometimes painted, sometimes marked by the hands that shaped them long ago. A place that once had voices, smells, movement, shade, and heat comes back first as material. This is the quiet work of archaeology. not the sudden discovery of treasure, but the patient reading of remains. A lost city beneath the sand may begin with something small, a scatter of pottery on the surface, a straight line in the landscape that seems too regular to be natural, a mound that rises differently from the dunes around it, a carved stone half exposed after the wind has shifted. To someone passing quickly, such signs may mean very little. To a trained eye, they can suggest that the ground is holding a human story. The first task is not to imagine too much. Archaeology depends on restraint. It asks what can be known from the evidence, what can be guessed carefully, and what must remain uncertain. A buried wall is not only a wall, it is a clue to direction, planning, construction, repair, and use. But it must be studied in relation to the soil around it, the objects near it, and the layers above and below. The ground has order even when it looks chaotic. Layer by layer, a site records change. A floor may belong to one period of occupation. Above it, a layer of wind-blown sand may suggest abandonment or reduced use. A collapsed roof can mark the failure of a building. A later hearth inside an older room may show that people reused the space after its original purpose had changed. The city is not uncovered all at once. It is understood through sequence. This is why excavation is slow. Removing too much too quickly can destroy the very information that gives the object meaning. A pot taken from the ground without context is only a pot. A pot found beside a hearth, below a collapsed roof, near a storage room, in a layer associated with abandonment, can tell a more complete story. Context is the difference between an object and evidence. In a desert site, preservation can be remarkable in some ways and harsh in others. Dryness may protect certain materials better than damp environments would. Pottery, stone, bone, plaster, and mud brick can survive for long periods. In rare cases, textiles, basketry, wood, seeds, rope, or leather may also endure if they are sheltered from moisture and disturbance. But preservation is never guaranteed. Heat, wind, erosion, animals, later visitors, looting, and earlier reuse can all change what remains. A beautiful object may vanish completely while a humble cooking pot survives. A palace wall may collapse beyond recognition while a storage jar in a corner remains almost where it was left. The past is selective, not because it chooses, but because materials respond differently to time. What archaeologists find is often ordinary. That is what makes it powerful. A broken bowl can speak of meals. A grinding stone can speak of grain and labor. A lamp can speak of evening light. A threshold worn smooth can speak of countless crossings. A storage jar can speak of planning for future hunger, future thirst, or future trade. These are quiet objects, but they are close to human life. A city is made visible through such things. Walls show where people created boundaries. Floors show where they stood. Wells show where they drew water. Drains, channels, and cisterns show how carefully they managed what the desert made scarce. Courtyards show how homes organized work and rest. Market areas show exchange. Temples and shrines show belief, ceremony, and community focus. Each discovery is small by itself, but together they begin to restore the shape of a world. The archaeologist does not bring the city back exactly as it was. That is impossible. The voices are gone. The daily gestures are gone. The particular worries of one household, the memory of one child, the private meanings of one object cannot be fully recovered. But patterns can return. The city's layout can be mapped. The relationship between water, market, homes and sacred spaces can be studied. Imported objects can reveal trade links. Animal bones can suggest diet, economy, or transport. Seeds and plant remains can show what people grew, stored, or carried. Inscriptions, if they survive, can give names, titles, prayers, laws, accounts, or fragments of administration. Even without writing, a site can speak. It speaks through use. A room blackened by smoke may suggest cooking, craft, or repeated fire. A concentration of broken pottery may show dumping, storage, or collapse. Heavy wear on a street can show movement. Repairs to a wall can show that people cared enough to maintain the building. A sudden destruction layer may tell one kind of story. Slow accumulation of sand tells another. In the lost city beneath the sand, the most moving discoveries may not be the grandest ones. A small lamp, a simple cup, a bead, a tool, a child-sized object, or the imprint of a woven mat can feel closer than a monumental gate. Such finds reduce the distance between ancient people and ourselves. They remind us that history was lived at the scale of hands, rooms, meals, sleep, work, and worry. This is why archaeology can feel gentle even when it studies loss. It does not only ask what disappeared, it asks what remains. And what remains, if read carefully, can be enough to hear the outline of a life. A buried city is rarely a single story. It is usually many stories layered together. One generation builds a wall, another repairs it, another changes the doorway, and another abandons the room. A courtyard may begin as a private domestic space, then later become storage, workshop, shelter, or ruin. A street may be paved, worn, patched, narrowed, blocked, reopened, and finally buried. To uncover a city is to discover that it was never fixed. This layered nature is one of the reasons archaeological sites require patience. The goal is not only to find the oldest thing or the most beautiful thing, it is to understand change. A city that lasted for centuries may have passed through different political systems, economic conditions, religious influences, building styles, and environmental pressures. Its ruins may hold traces of prosperity, repair, decline, reuse, and forgetting. Sometimes the evidence is clear. A coin may help date a layer. A style of pottery may connect the site to a known period. An inscription may mention a ruler, a place, a god, a merchant, or an official. A carbonized seed, a wooden beam, or organic material can sometimes be tested to help establish age. But even with such tools, interpretation remains careful work. Dates, objects, and layers must be connected without forcing them into a story they cannot support. This restraint gives archaeology its calm dignity. It accepts that some questions will remain open. Who was the last person to close a certain door? Why was one jar left behind and another taken away? Did the final residents expect to return? Was a room abandoned because of poverty, danger, damage, or simply a change in household needs? Sometimes the ground gives hints, sometimes it does not. The unanswered questions are part of the atmosphere of ruins. They leave space for imagination, but responsible imagination stays close to the evidence. It does not turn every wall into a legend or every object into a mystery. It allows ordinary explanations to matter. A broken bowl may not be a ritual object. It may simply be a broken bowl. Yet that simplicity is valuable because ordinary life is what most of the past was made of. In the excavation of a desert city, water is often one of the most important clues. Wells, cisterns, channels, basins, drains, and storage jars can reveal how the city survived. A settlement in a dry landscape must organize itself around water with unusual care. The location of wells may help explain why the city existed where it did. The size of storage facilities may suggest population, trade, planning, or periods of shortage. Repairs to water systems may show long-term maintenance or stress. If a well has dried, collapsed, or filled with sand, it may still hold evidence. Objects can fall or be thrown into wells. Sediments can build up. Plant remains, animal bones, pottery, and tools may settle there. A well can become an archive without anyone intending it to. What was once a source of daily life becomes, centuries later, a deep container of information. The market area may tell another kind of story. Imported pottery, weights, seals, coins, storage rooms, animal bones, and traces of workshops can reveal how the city connected to the road. If certain goods came from far away, the site was not isolated. If evidence of trade declines over time, the city may have been losing its place in the network. If local production continues while imports fade, people may have adapted to a smaller world. Homes reveal quieter patterns: the size of rooms, the presence of courtyards, the number of storage jars, the arrangement of hearths, and the objects found on floors can suggest how households were organized. Some homes may show wealth, others modest means. Some may have been rebuilt many times. A house is rarely only a private space. It can also be a place of work, storage, craft, and family economy. Sacred spaces, if found, require especially careful interpretation. A temple or shrine may preserve objects that were deliberately placed, offerings that were repeated, inscriptions that carry names or prayers, and architectural choices that separate the sacred from the everyday. But even sacred buildings change. They can be rebuilt, neglected, repurposed, damaged, or remembered long after their original rituals are gone. The city's decline may be visible not through one dramatic sign, but through accumulation. More sand in rooms, fewer repairs, changes in pottery, reduced imports, abandoned outer quarters, reuse of earlier buildings for simpler purposes, burials in areas once used for housing or work. A road that once brought wealth may leave fewer traces in later layers. The city does not announce its decline, it records it in small changes. This is why archaeological discovery can be so moving. It shows that human lives were not abstract. People adapted, struggled, repaired, reused, and continued. They did not know what chapter of history they were living in. They lived one season at a time, making decisions from the information they had. Archaeology finds the results of those decisions after time has made them still. At the end of a day on such a site, when the light softens and the desert wind moves across the cleared stones, the ruins can feel almost alive with absence. A wall line has been exposed. A floor has appeared. A jar has been lifted from the sand. A street has been traced a little farther than before. These discoveries do not restore the city completely, but they change its silence. The place is no longer only a mound beneath the desert. It has begun to speak again, quietly, through the fragments that time allowed to survive. And in that careful return, the lost city becomes something more than a legend. It becomes a place that can be studied, a place that can be mapped, a place that once held real lives, not fully recovered, never fully understood, but no longer entirely hidden beneath the sand. Ruins affect the mind in a way that complete buildings often do not. A complete city tells us what it is. A ruin asks us what it was. Its broken walls, empty doorways, buried floors, and fallen columns leave space for imagination. We see enough to recognize human intention, but not enough to fully restore the life that once filled the place. This uncertainty is part of the power of ruins. They stand between presence and absence. They are not entirely gone because stone, pottery, foundations, and pathways remain. But they are not alive in the way they once were. The people who understood their purpose have disappeared. The routines that gave them meaning have ended. What remains is the outline of a world. A lost city beneath the sand carries this feeling even more strongly. Because it was hidden, it seems to have kept a secret. The desert covered it slowly, protecting some fragments while erasing others. When the ruins appear again, they do not return as ordinary architecture. They return as messages from a buried time, incomplete but still powerful. A wall is only a wall, yet in a ruin it can feel like a memory. It remembers through position, material, and wear. It shows where a room ended, where a street turned, where a courtyard opened to the sky. It may reveal the thickness needed to keep heat away, or the repairs made after damage. It may carry marks of tools, plaster, smoke, water, sand, and later collapse. The wall does not speak, but it holds the consequences of human choices. This is what ruins preserve best, not the full story, but the trace of decisions. Someone chose where to build. Someone mixed mud, cut stone, carried water, set a threshold, raised a roof, patched a crack, and opened a doorway toward shade or wind. These acts were practical at the time. Centuries later, they become evidence of care. The memory of ruins is therefore not like human memory. It has no feelings of its own. It does not remember faces, voices, or names unless those names were written somewhere and happen to survive. It does not know sadness or nostalgia. Those belong to us. The ruin simply remains, and because it remains, we are able to feel something in its presence. We bring memory to the ruin, but the ruin guides it. A broken street makes us imagine movement. A storage room makes us imagine preparation. A temple makes us imagine ceremony. A well makes us imagine thirst, labor, and relief. A market makes us imagine exchange, argument, trust, and waiting. The site offers shapes. The mind tries to complete them. This can be peaceful, but also humbling. A ruin reminds us that every human structure belongs to time. Even a city that seemed permanent to its residents was temporary on a larger scale. Its walls lasted longer than a human life, but not forever. Its roads carried generations, but eventually they fell silent. Its customs, disputes, ambitions, and fears were real, yet many of them left no direct record. From this distance, the city becomes both specific and universal. It was one place with its own water, roads, materials, beliefs, and people. At the same time, it stands for many places that have risen and faded. Every ruin contains a local history, but also a broader reminder that human life is always making itself inside conditions it cannot fully control. The desert makes this especially clear. In a fertile valley, ruins may be softened by grass, trees, roots, and rain. In the desert, ruins often meet a harsher kind of stillness. Light is sharper, shadows are clearer, the sky feels larger. Stone and sand share the same quiet palette. A ruined city under moonlight can appear almost outside ordinary time, as if it has become part of the night itself. But the stillness should not make us imagine that the people who lived there were distant from us in every way. They were not symbols. They were human beings with ordinary concerns. They needed water, shelter, food, safety, friendship, trade, sleep, and meaning. They knew frustration, fatigue, hope, illness, pride, fear, love, and boredom. Their world may have been very different from ours, but the basic shape of life was not entirely unfamiliar. This is one reason ruins can feel intimate. They reduce the past to things we recognize: a doorway, a bowl, a street, a place to sleep, a place to gather, a wall built against heat. Even when the language, religion, clothing, and political world are distant, the material needs of life create a bridge. A ruin does not bring the dead back, but it allows us to understand that they once had a present. They did not live in ancient history. They lived now as everyone does. They woke into mornings that felt immediate. They worried about practical things. They expected some plans to succeed and others to fail. They repaired what was broken because the future seemed close enough to matter. That thought changes the feeling of the lost city. It is no longer only an atmospheric image of moonlit columns and sand. It becomes a reminder that every age is ordinary to the people living inside it. The city was not built to become mysterious. It became mysterious because time removed the context that made it familiar. The memory of ruins is partly the memory of lost context. We can see the stones, but not every rule of the household. We can map the temple, but not every prayer. We can find the market, but not every conversation. We can study the road, but not every fear of those who crossed it. Still, the incompleteness does not make the site empty of meaning. It makes it quiet, and quiet can be a generous space for attention. There is a reason people continue to seek ruins, photograph them, write about them, and imagine the lives that once surrounded them. Ruins show time in visible form. Usually, time is difficult to see directly. We notice its effects in our bodies, in seasons, in memory, in objects that wear out, and in places that change gradually around us. A ruin gathers those effects into one scene. It shows construction and decay together. It shows intention and erosion in the same stone. A broken column, for example, is not only broken, it still points upward. Its original purpose has failed, but its form remains legible. A fallen wall no longer protects a room, yet it still marks where protection was once needed. A buried street no longer carries movement, yet it preserves direction. Ruins often keep the shape of purpose after the purpose itself has ended. This is what makes them so compelling. They are evidence of effort surviving beyond use. In the lost city, the memory of ruins may live in many layers. There is the memory held by objects in the ground. There is the memory kept in stories, if any survived among nearby communities or travelers. There is the memory created by archaeologists through maps, drawings, photographs, and careful records. And there is the memory we form when we look at the ruins and imagine the city as it may have been. Each layer is different. The object in the ground is physical. The story is cultural. The archaeological record is analytical. The imagination is personal. None of them is complete alone, but together they allow the lost city to re-enter the human world. This does not mean the city becomes fully known. Some questions remain beyond recovery. Many names are gone. Many events were never recorded. Most daily actions left no mark. Even a well-excavated site remains partial because the past is always larger than the evidence that survives. Yet partial knowledge is not failure. It is the normal condition of understanding history. We never receive the past whole. We receive it through fragments, patterns, comparisons, and careful interpretation. A ruin teaches this gently. It does not offer everything. It asks us to slow down and accept that meaning can exist even when certainty is limited. For a sleep documentary, this is a useful thought. The mind does not need to solve the ruin tonight. It can simply rest with the image. Moonlight over broken stone, sand gathered along an old wall, stars above a city that once believed in its own tomorrow. There is calm in allowing the past to remain partly hidden. The ruins also remind us that disappearance is not the same as nothingness. The city disappeared from daily life, but not entirely from earth. Its materials stayed, its layout left marks, its objects waited under sand, its roads influenced the land, its story, once rediscovered, entered a new form of existence. It became history, archaeology, image, thought, and question. In this way, ruins have an afterlife, not the life they once had, but a quieter one. They no longer shelter families or receive caravans. They no longer hold markets at dusk or lamps in courtyards, but they continue to shape human attention. They make people wonder about time, fragility, survival, and the deep continuity between our lives and those before us. A ruin also changes the landscape around it. A desert with ruins is not the same as an untouched desert. The stones alter the wind. The walls cast shadows. The broken city becomes a place where animals may shelter, plants may catch, and people may pause. Even after abandonment, human work remains part of the environment. The city is no longer separate from the desert. It has become one of the desert's forms. This is not only loss. There is a strange peace in it. The city returns to the land that supported it, but it does not vanish without trace. Its stones are weathered by the same wind that once cooled its streets at night. Its walls stand beneath the same stars that guided travelers toward its gate. Its buried floors hold the dust of the same landscape its people crossed every day. The memory of ruins is therefore not fixed in the past alone. It belongs to the present moment of looking. When we imagine the lost city beneath the sand, we are not only thinking about what happened long ago, we are also thinking about our own relationship with time. We know that the buildings around us, the streets we know, and the routines that feel permanent are also part of change. This does not have to be frightening. It can make the present feel more tender. The people of the lost city once trusted their world enough to build within it. We do the same. Their walls became ruins, but while they stood, they mattered. Their city faded, but while it lived, it held real mornings and real nights. The knowledge that things pass does not make them meaningless. It makes their existence more precious. As night settles over the ruins, the desert seems to hold both silence and memory. The old streets are quiet now, but their direction remains. The houses are broken, but their rooms can still be traced. The temple is worn, but its raised place in the city can still be felt. The market is gone, but the space where people gathered has not entirely disappeared. The moon moves over all of it with the same calm light. It does not restore what time has taken. It does not explain every fragment, but it makes the ruins visible enough for the mind to enter them gently. And perhaps that is why these places continue to call to us. They offer no complete return, no perfect answer, and no final reconstruction. They offer something quieter. the chance to stand at the edge of human memory and feel that even what is lost can still leave a shape behind. At the end of the night, the desert changes before the sun appears. The sky does not brighten all at once. First, the darkness loses some of its depth. The stars nearest the horizon begin to fade. The dunes, which were blue and silver under the moon, slowly recover their warmer colors. Stone edges become easier to see, and the buried city, which seemed almost dreamlike at night, returns to the shape of earth, sand, and ruin. Dawn in the desert is quiet, but it is not empty. The air is still cool from the night. Shadows lie long across the ground. The wind may be gentle enough to move only the finest layer of sand, brushing it against broken walls and half-buried steps. For a short time, before the heat of day begins, the desert holds a softer mood. It is the hour when the land seems to breathe before becoming bright again. Over the lost city, this first light reveals what moonlight only suggested. A wall line becomes clearer. A column casts a narrow shadow. A doorway, worn by time and partly filled with sand, no longer looks like a dark opening but like a piece of architecture. The ruins are still broken, still incomplete, but morning gives them a different kind of honesty. Night made them mysterious. Dawn makes them patient. The city has passed through many mornings. Some belong to its living years. People once woke within its houses, opened doors, checked water, prepared bread, gathered tools, and watched the sky for the day's heat. Other mornings came after the city had begun to decline, when fewer households remained and the streets had grown quieter. Later still, dawn arrived over empty rooms, collapsed roofs, and walls no one repaired. Now morning comes over ruins. There is no market opening, no caravan unloading, no lamp being put away after a night's use. Yet the place is not meaningless. The stones still hold direction. The streets still suggest movement. The well, if it remains, still marks the reason people gathered here. The city no longer performs its old work, but it continues to carry the shape of that work. This is what remains after the long passage of time, not the complete life of the city, because no ruin can preserve that fully. Not every name, not every voice, not every evening conversation or private hope. What remains is quieter than life, but stronger than forgetting. It is the outline of human presence held in stone, pottery, sand, and memory. The desert around it is wide. That wideness once made the city necessary. Travelers needed water, shade, walls, and news. Merchants needed storage, trust, and a place to rest animals. Families needed homes that could endure heat and dryness. The city rose because the desert was difficult, and for a time it answered that difficulty with order. Then the balance changed. The roads shifted, water weakened, trade moved, people left, and the desert slowly entered the spaces they no longer kept. Nothing about this process required the city's life to have been a failure. Many places exist for a time, serve their purpose, hold generations, and then pass into another form. The lost city became ruin, but before it was ruin, it was home. This thought is important. When we look at ancient remains, it is easy to see only disappearance. But every ruin also means that something once stood. A broken wall means people built. A buried floor means people lived above it. A worn threshold means movement continued long enough to leave a mark. Even loss carries evidence of presence. Dawn makes this feeling gentler. Under the first light, the ruins do not seem to ask for sorrow. They ask for attention. The sand has covered much, but not everything. Time has removed the noise of daily life, but not every trace of its pattern. The city is gone as a living place, yet it remains as a question, a memory, and a quiet connection between those who lived before and those who look after. As the sun approaches the horizon, the moon fades from the sky if it is still visible at all. The stars disappear into the growing blue. The night's mystery gives way to the clarity of day. Soon the heat will return, and the desert will become bright enough to hide its own softness. But for now, the ruins rest in the calm hour between darkness and sun. The city beneath the sand has been seen for a little while, not completely, not as it was, but enough to remember that it was once alive. Every lost city leaves us with two images. One is the city as it may have been, streets filled with movement, water drawn from wells, markets opening at the edge of the road, lamps glowing after sunset, homes cooling under the stars, and people living inside a world that felt present and real. The other image is the city as it remains, broken stone, buried rooms, wind-shaped sand, fragments of pottery, and the silence of a place no longer used for its first purpose. Between these two images is history. History is not only a record of what happened, it is also the distance between a life once lived and the trace it leaves behind. In that distance, we learn humility. We learn that the past was full of ordinary days, not just great events. We learn that places can matter deeply, even if they are later forgotten. We learn that human beings have always tried to make shelter, order, and meaning in landscapes that were larger than themselves. The lost city beneath the sand is not one place only. It is an idea that belongs to many deserts and many centuries. It belongs to cities whose names survive and to settlements whose names are gone. It belongs to caravan roads, oasis walls, abandoned wells, buried courtyards, temple stones, storage jars, and the fragile memory of people who expected the future to continue. Somewhere, a road once led toward such a city. Somewhere, a traveler once saw its walls at the end of a hard journey and felt relief. Somewhere, a child once knew those streets not as history, but as home. These thoughts do not need to be dramatic. They are quiet enough. The power of a lost city is not only in mystery, but in recognition. We recognize the desire to remain, to build, to protect water, to welcome morning, to close a door at night and believe it will open again. That belief is part of every human settlement. It connects the old city to us. The ruins remind us that permanence is never complete, but they also remind us that impermanence is not emptiness. A city can fade and still have mattered. A life can leave only small traces and still have been real. A wall can fall and still show where shelter once stood. The sand can cover a place without making it meaningless. As daylight strengthens, the desert becomes ordinary again. The shadows shorten, the stones warm, the dunes return to gold. What looked secret under the moon becomes part of the visible world. If someone were walking there now, they might see only ruins and open sand. But after this journey, the place feels different. The silence has depth. The broken walls contain the suggestion of rooms. The road is no longer only a line through emptiness. It is the memory of arrival. The story does not need a final discovery. No single object has to explain everything. The city remains incomplete, as all histories do. There will always be unanswered questions beneath the sand. That is part of its calm. We can leave some rooms unopened, some names unknown, some footsteps untraced. The past does not have to become fully visible to be honored. For now, it is enough to imagine the dawn, light spreading across dunes, a ruined gateway facing the morning, stone warmed slowly after the cold of night, a buried city resting beneath the sand, no longer alive in the old way, but not entirely gone. The desert continues around it. Wind will move more sand. Shadows will shift across the walls. Another night will come, and the stars will return above the ruins. Time will keep passing, quietly, without hurry, and the lost city will remain where it is, part memory, part earth, part question, held beneath the sand, under the wide and patient sky.